back on the record. The time is 9:58.
Doctor, I think you were in the middle of your answer when you're ready to continue.
Okay. So let me just reframe. The question was, what was something that you remember discussing with him? And that's what I'm continuing to answer. That's actually a more open question than I realized. So, because that would include. All right, so let me do the dinner part, and then we'll do the other part. We talked about. I think we're around. I leave off around 1909, 1910 or so. Okay. Then we talked about the Martland paper, 1927, about Punch Drunk, and the references soon thereafter about that also applying to football. And of course the NCAA's. Now the NCAA did nothing. Okay, so pardon me. Okay, so between 1909 and 1927, the NCAA did nothing. Okay, 1927, with the Martland paper comes out talking about punch drunk syndrome, which is essentially CTE and concussions from boxing. The NCAA did nothing. Okay, 1928. NCAA did nothing. 1929 did nothing. 1930 did nothing. By the way, this specific sequence of year by years, we had that conversation. Okay? 1931, nothing. 1933, nothing. 1933, pardon me, they did something. They set up and wrote a very good report on what they should do about concussions. Okay, and made recommendations of what they should do about concussions. 1933. Okay. Now that was just recommendations from a committee. So they still, as I said before, in 1933, did nothing. In other words, took no action to intervene. They did know and write down the things they should do, okay, but they did not do them. Okay, so when I said did nothing, that was technically correct because they took no action to intervene to stop anything or publicize the problem or do anything about the problem. But they did write down what the solution was. So they acknowledged the problem, understood the problem, and knew some of the things they needed to do to reduce or impact on the problem. But they didn't do any of them. And then we went through that by decade, more or less. So Mr. Egdorf said, well, did they do anything in the 1940s to implement the things they designed in the 1933 program? No, they didn't, Mr. Egdorf. Did they do anything in the 1950s? No, they didn't. Did they do anything in the 1960s? No, they didn't. How about the 1970s? Why, people at the table were around, and, you know, some of the students' parents were born in the 1970s. Mr. Pletz was playing football in the 1970s, late 60s and 70s. Did they do anything before he played football? No, they didn't, Mr. Egdorf. 1980s. No, they didn't, Mr. Egdorf. 1990s. No, they didn't, Mr. Egdorf. 2000, new millennium. Year 2K. Did they do anything? No, they didn't do anything. 2007. Yes, they implemented a few changes. 2010, a few more changes. 2013. Why, they hired a doctor. That only took them from 1933 to 2013. Did they implement all the corrections, even as of 1918, as we sit here today in Providence, where some of the meetings involved Brown University, right here in Providence? Did they do anything? Did they do all those things that they knew about in 1933? Never mind all the other things they learned since then, which we also discussed and we'll get to. Just dealing with the 1933 recommendations. No, they haven't implemented them all yet. Not even in 2018. Okay. So then we talked about, let's see my little outline here. We talked about my little outline. Where's that? So we can get some more details in here. I don't want to just speak generally. I need to speak specifically. Where's that PowerPoint that we prepared? Is it gone from the room?
Well, it should, hopefully it should be in here.
We can go off the record while you look for it.
No, that's all right. I got other things we could talk about. We talked about a lot. Okay.
Long dinner.
Okay. No, it wasn't just the dinner. He asked what we
Oh, no,
discussed.
I'm
It
just
wasn't
saying.
limited to the dinner.
Oh, that's right.
No, that was not my intent. If you look back at the line of questioning.
Excuse
I understand
me, you're interrupting my-
he's going to answer what he's going to answer. I got it.
You're interrupting my answer, okay? And you know,
You were looking for
and
documents.
just as a matter of issue here, let me explain something. I am not a memory reader, a mind reader, or any other kind of science kind of person, okay? So I can only answer the questions you ask me that have come on this little piece of paper here in front of me, right? So I can't tell intent, okay? I can only read the words and answer what you ask, just to let you know what I'm doing, okay? And we went back and I reread the question just to be sure, and it was as I thought it was. What did you discuss with the lawyer?
Objection non-responsive.
He's still responsive. Don't interrupt him.
Yeah. You got to wait till the whole answer's done.
Let me go off the record while they're looking for whatever they're looking for.
Oh, no, I don't want, I can keep talking, no problem. We go over some of the other things we talked about. For example, we could introduce the room.
Sir, this is not, I did not ask to introduce the room.
Hey, He's answering his question.
What did you discuss at dinner?
Well, you know what, Stefan? You asked the question.
Okay. The question was not, what did you discuss at dinner? The
what
question
did
is,
you
what did you
discuss?
discuss with Mr. Egdorf? Okay? Just so we keep going back to that. You want him to reread the question so you can remember it? I reread the question.
We're getting the PowerPoint for you, David, so if
Okay,
you can
thanks.
have
All right,
some
so if we
answer
go
before-
around the room, all these things on the wall, we discussed those things on the walls. So we see down here, we have about 15 or 20 posters, which go over the medical literature, okay, over different points in time.
Hold on one second, Doctor. Are you really texting while he's answering your question?
I didn't ask what was on the wall.
Are you really texting while he's answering your question?
I'm paying attention to him. He's multitasking. I can multitask.
So you are texting while he's answering your question.
You're on your computer while the step
I'm
is
not
going
asking
on.
him questions.
I'm listening to him.
You're the one who said you wanted this deposition, and you're texting while he's answering your question.
Well, he's also
I guess we
he's also
see.
filibustering. Go ahead and answer the question.
No, he's
Doctor.
answering the question
I'm
you
listening.
asked. Maybe you should ask a better question.
Okay.
Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
So, at any rate, we discussed the formation of these posters. Now, on those white posters is most of the medical literature. I think there's, well, we have a stack of them here for you. And then we discussed some of the particular articles from that literature that was of significance, more significant than others. And then we discussed, you see that purple one over there? That purple one is why the NCAA did things, why or didn't do things, because in general the NCAA didn't do things. And mostly that is a series of documents that indicate, or excerpts from documents that indicate, as they decided not to do things, whenever they gave a reason, it was all about the money. Okay? So we didn't do something because it was about the money, would decrease revenue, cost us more money. Now, when they did do things, it was also about the money, because the reason those changes happened, as I mentioned before in 2007, was because of litigation. NCAA got sued, and as part of the settlements, they were forced to implement some of the changes they'd known about almost a century before. So those lawsuits, and they were settled to avoid spending money, those lawsuits, okay, were what drove the NCAA to do something, again, to save money. Okay. Then we talked about the NCAA 990s. Because the 990s are in great contrast to the 1906 documents and discussions that's claimed that the NCAA was formed specifically for the purpose of reducing deaths and injuries, but deaths in football players, college football players. And the contrast between the NCAA 1906 public statements, the rug put over the termites, and the current purposes as explained in the 990 are dramatic. The 990, which I have here somewhere and we discussed, so in this pile right here, here's the 990.
So I just want to get this straight.
So-
I'm not allowed to ask another question until he stops talking.
When he's finished with his answer, that's right.
Okay.
Although you've violated that about 7 times now. I didn't make you ask the question that way, Stefan.
To continue, this is what the NCAA tells the IRS their mission is. Nothing about protecting health and safety.
Is this, you're still discussing this at dinner?
You know, you get to ask one question at a time. When you keep interjecting other questions, okay, then I have 3 or 4 questions on the table at the same time, and I don't know, no one can look at the record and say, which question am I answering?
I'm trying to be polite,
Okay.
Stefan. Please don't interrupt him anymore.
right.
He's answering the question you asked him.
Okay? So, this is what we discussed, me and Mr. Egdorf, or Mr. Egdorf and I, pardon me. My second grade teacher's going to admonish me for that one. Okay? Every year, we didn't discuss my second grade teacher. Every year, the NCAA and its members equip more than 480,000 student athletes, quote, close quote, with skills to succeed on the playing field, in the classroom, and throughout life. They do that by prioritizing academics, well-being, and fairness of the association. And fairness, the association, through its member schools, conferences, affiliated organizations, and national office staff, shares a commitment to collegiate model of athletics, in which the young men and women competing in college sports are students first, who choose to play sports as part of their educational experience, the highest levels of integrity and sportsmanship, the pursuit of excellence in both academics and athletics, the supporting role college sports plays in the higher education mission, in enhancing the sense of campus community and in strengthening the identity of member schools, an inclusive culture that fosters equitable participation for student athletes, in quotes, my quotes, not the original quotes, and athletics administrators from diverse backgrounds, respect for differences between, and then it was cut off on the thing. And then it talks more about governance. So we discussed this. We discussed how the term, quote, student athletes was created to defeat lawsuits that the NCAA was losing in the 1960s to worker compensation claims. How that was a fraud, because there's no such thing as student athletes. Students are closer to indentured servants. Indentured servants would be a better term, or in some kind of a semi-slave operation. And we discussed why that is. That was in my report. We went over that. Now, we also went over this PowerPoint, Mr. Egdorf and I. So we discussed this PowerPoint. Okay? So, when the NCAA does something, it is not for safety, just as there's no mention in this 990 describing the mission of the NCAA. Nothing, not a word, not a syllable about health and safety. Nothing. Even though it was formed with the idea, with a public relations scheme to claim that it was going to do something about health and safety. But in its current mission, it doesn't even have the words there. Not even, they don't have, no fig leaf now. This is also not true, as I said about the student, but it's not even a mention of protecting people's health and safety. So this, we discussed, when the NCAA actually does something, it's not for safety, but always a reaction to protect its revenue stream
Gene,
of free labor,
I understand he's
in
in the middle of a
parentheses,
question.
slaves,
Do not
from lawsuits.
interrupt.
Can we get the judge
and
on the
public-
phone so we can?
When he's finished with his answer, you can do whatever you want. You asked the question, Stefan.
I understand that, but
So-
I would like to get the judge. I would like to.
Well, when
I'd
he's
like to know
finished,
from the judge.
you can ask to take a break, and you can call the judge if you want to. And I'll tell the judge this is the question, and he answered it. I suspect your next question will be a better one. Continue, David.
Okay. You interrupted me in the middle of a sentence, so I'm going to reread that sentence. It's an important sentence.
Did you have the PowerPoint with you at the dinner?
Yeah. It wasn't, well, first of all, the
Hold
question
on one
wasn't,
second. Do not ask him new questions while he's answering this one. Second, you're misrepresenting what the pending question is. You asked him, what have you discussed with Mr. Egdorf?
okay. You're right, my mistake, sorry. This is, just to be clear, this is not dinner, as I understand it. You dispensed with the preliminaries. Maybe you should go back over the preliminaries. My understanding of what happens at a deposition is you ask questions one at a time, and I give responses one at a time. Do we have a different understanding of what a deposition is, sir? Maybe we should, because, let me ask now.
Just
Is that your
Oh, you're
understanding?
asking me?
I'm
Just-
asking
Oh no,
you.
I had an understanding that we were here to talk about Mr. Pletz in this case and your opinions, and you started off by telling me what kind of octopus you wanted.
Hold
for dinner.
on.
So-
Excuse me, that's
one
not.
more time.
He was asking me a question.
No,
Well,
no, I
you're
was
the-
asking you about the format of a deposition.
You're the
My
lawyer.
understanding it was a question and answer. Is
Hold
that
on.
not the format of the deposition? This is not dinner right now. We're not having a back and forth right now.
David,
This
let's-
is not dinner.
David, let's go back to let's just answer his question. And he's being improper, and he's trying to bait you to get into that. And let's just stick with the question and the answer. And you let him know when you're done with this answer, and he's going to do you the courtesy and not interrupt for the 9th or 10th time.
Did you just say something?
No,
Okay, so you didn't just say,
I didn't say.
okay. Just checking.
I'm anticipating at some point I will stop you to call the judge, but
You're not going to stop him. We're not going off the record till he's done with this answer.
It is not for safety, but always a reaction to protect its revenue stream of free labor, parentheses, slaves, from lawsuits and public scrutiny. Okay? And then we went over the outline of kind of the summary of what we have on the posters. Okay? So I'll skip some of this because I've covered it. 1905 to, we've got the, here we go, the gridiron crisis. Okay? In the gridiron crisis, death was becoming a factor. 18 fatalities and 149 serious injuries of the 1905 season brought critics out in force. Condemnations from the press were plentiful. Outrage grew among the American people. Then Harold Moore died at NYU, November 1905. Okay. He died of a concussion of the brain, documented in many newspapers, if you can see that. A lot of newspapers covered this. It was a big deal. Okay. So in response, the NCAA, as I said, called a caucus of colleges to, quote, reform the rules. That was the beginning of the NCAA, although it wasn't called that at the time. And the Chancellor Day of Syracuse said then, one human life is too big a price for all of the football games of the season. And of course, there were many more than one. Acute deaths, these are deaths during and shortly after the game. Never mind chronic, deaths from chronic injuries. So some people thought one death was too much. But the colleges got together and formed the NCAA. And the deaths could continue. In 1906, the need to educate people about concussion, both during practice and games, was noted. And they noted Nichols' this is paper reported that quote, cases of concussion were frequent, both during practice and games. They know that only 2 games were played during the entire season in which a case of concussion of the brain did not happen. Okay. Then the Intercollegiate Athletic Association was formed. That's the predecessor of the NCAA. Teddy Roosevelt, the president, called them together. And the purpose was to address the number of catastrophic injuries in college football. A joint committee approved nearly 30 changes to the playing rules, with most, they claimed, intended to remove brutality and to change the character of the game in a positive way. Today on its website, which I think has been removed, but at the time we did this, it was up. You can still get it on the Wayback Machine. In 1906, the NCAA, this is the NCAA speaking, was founded to keep college athletics safe. We are working hard to protect them physically and mentally on the field and off. And I drew Mr. Egdorf's attention to the fact that that's what the website said, and this is what the legal document said, that establishes to the government what they do, and they're not similar at all. There's nothing in this mission statement that talks about what they claim to be from 1906 to 2017. I think this was removed around that time. Okay. So what was the response of the NCAA in 1906? NCAA used its power to make football more popular and more profitable. Okay? They commented on the changes were made partly to avoid the
I'm going to have to interrupt
uninteresting...
again.
You're not going to interrupt.
Let's call the judge.
When he's finished, you can call the judge.
Let's call the
I'm
judge.
not
right
going
now.
off the record.
That's fine. We'll sit here on the record.
He's going to be answering the question. You're not interrupting him. You asked the question. Go ahead, David.
And
You can laugh all you want. You did it to yourself.
okay.
And you can make a face all you want. That's why you don't want the camera on you.
What are you talking about? I didn't make a face.
Yeah, you did. Don't lie.
Okay.
I got 10 people in here who just saw what you did, just like you huffed at him a minute ago.
Okay.
Okay. As I was saying, and what we discussed, these changes were made partly to avoid the uninteresting, quote, mass plays, as I said earlier, but now this is the quote, and partly to lessen the number and severity of the injuries received by the game. Nichols stated that, quote, all games during the time were played under the revised rules, which very much lessened the old-fashioned mass plays and made open plays much more profitable. That's a quote. Okay. Okay, and then I believe a Harvard person said, this is 1906, concern with death and injury played second fiddle, referring to the NCAA initial changes. The Harvard head of rules committee, quote, said the reason he wanted rules changes because, quote, we wanted new, quote, Harvard rules that would enable him to beat Yale. At that time, a lot of people don't know that, but what is now the Ivy League, that was like the Big Ten, Big 12, the SEC. Not anymore, but that's what it was like then. So the Eastern schools were the powerhouses. Heisman, I believe, went to Brown. Okay. We did talk about that. Absolutely. The 1909-19 football, so as a result of those world changes, what happened? The, quote, radical changes, okay, led to an increased injury and death crisis 2 years later. So those alleged reforms, that was like feeding the termites. More people died. More people got injured. No restrictions were placed upon the use of mass plays, a shortcoming that continued to the succeeding injury crisis. Stanford's president commented on that. He complained that the rule system allowed questionable practices. He urged that the farce of, quote, football reform, close quote, his words, farce, of 5 years before should not be repeated. Because there was an effort in 1909 to try to do something else since more people were getting killed, not just that one person, and not just the 10 or 15, but many more. And then a real crisis. There was a public outcry that threatened to ban football. We talked about some of the cartoons that were written about this, editorial cartoons that show people being dragged off. I don't know if, can you see this on the camera? Can you get a little close up on the cartoons? Because we certainly looked at and discussed the cartoons. This top cartoon shows a football player being carried off the field. Got it? Okay. And they were worried about this. This was a serious threat. Not the threat to people getting killed and injured. The threat was expressed by Edwin Alderman, the president of Virginia, who had a death.
I'm going to go ahead and call.
Okay? He told the NCAA convention he believed that the game was doomed unless radical changes were made. Professor C.A. Short of Delaware College suggested that legislative intervention was coming, and indeed, that it was possible, quote, the playing of football might in some states be treated as a crime. A crime. That was a real threat to the people who wanted to continue football. That was the reason that the NCAA became additionally concerned and produced additional what we call anti-warnings. Okay.
In the Pletz lawsuit.
Okay. In 1909, the Football Rules Convention acknowledged, in the face of a, quote, public stampede, a wise modification of the rules was necessary. The changes were made, and the Rules Committee reported in 1910 that the game was, quote, comparatively safe and reasonably free from danger. Now, this was, of course, not true. This was just a public relations gambit to get the public to continue the playing of football. The committee, and they concluded themselves, the committee definitely saved college football and the money that they made from college football, my aside.
Pletz versus
Okay.
NCAA.
And it may well have saved the NCAA in the process. So what did they do? Oh, they made 3 rules changes between 1909 and 1910.
870-5775.
The first rules change to reduce injuries, why that was to say that you could kick a field goal. 3 points. That was a rules change introduced allegedly to reduce concussion injuries. Okay. 1910, they came up with another rules change to reduce allegedly concussions and deaths. Only 7 players had to be on the line of scrimmage. Now, there's no data indicating that any of these things had anything to do with concussions and deaths. And then they made a third rules change. Pass interference does not apply 20 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. Okay? And the passer must be 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And there was only 1 pass allowed, forward pass, during each down. So basically, the last one allowed pass interference greater than 20 yards downfield, which would, of course, likely increase injuries, not reduce them. But the NCAA claimed that these interventions, these rule changes to the public, would eliminate or reduce concussions and deaths. And of course, there was no basis for that in any of those changes. And one of the changes was likely to have increased injuries. Sad. Okay. And then in 1910, people in the NCAA understood something else. Okay. Coach Stagg from Indiana declared, "There's great demand for safer football. No doubt there is, and no doubt, too, there's a great demand down below for a cooler hell. But a cool hell would not be hell, and safe football would not be football to those atavic citizens who love the game." So the NCAA members basically were using violence as a way of increasing revenue, increasing participation of the public. So rules changes that would decrease the amount of hell would decrease the amount of revenue. Okay. So there became a trade-off between, in 1910, the reduction of injuries and profits from the game. And of course, in 1910, concussion rates went up again. Even after that, some people in the public weren't fooled by the anti-warnings campaign, the false reassurance that the NCAA gave the public that they were doing something to reduce concussions and injuries. So the public still considered football too dangerous even after the NCAA, quote, regulations. The cover of Puck magazine, this one we're going to want to get on camera too, shows a young man headed for college carrying a football and a suitcase, labeled Harold Halfback, Yale. His sobbing mother hands him a helmet and shoulder pads. His sister a first aid kit and shin guards. Even the dog is crying. Punch was a well-distributed magazine at the time. Got it? Okay, so now, again, as I said before, mostly rules that made the concussion problem worse, like making pass interference legal. So Martland, 1928, publishes a medical article on chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which after all is what brings us here 70 years later. Pardon me, 90 years later. 90 years later. Nothing done 90 years later, and we're still talking about this 1928 article. He described it among boxers, and he described the symptoms of CTE. Flopping and foot leg, unsteadiness of equilibrium, periods of mental confusion and slowing of muscular action, hesitancy in speech, shakes in the hands, nodding movements of the head, involuntary, and in severe cases, tilting of the head, dragging of the legs, staggering, propulsive gait, Parkinson-like facial characteristics. Parkinson's, the disease suffered by some of the greatest boxers, particularly noted Muhammad Ali. Backward swing of the body, tremors, vertigo, and deafness. Mental deterioration that may result in commitment to an asylum. All in 1928, known in 1928. And shortly thereafter, it was recognized that football could produce the same symptoms. And when did the NCAA respond? Did they respond in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 70s, the 90s? No. In 2014, 4 years ago, they developed a mind, body, and sport campaign. But that wasn't a campaign that was designed to address these problems in any way but a public relations campaign. That was another rug thrown over the termites. That was false reassurance. That was an anti-warning campaign. Because that campaign said, though there's little known about what causes CTE, claiming this disease that had been described and uncontestedly accepted, and by the way, only in the modern literature, 1928. The first paper on the things described as CTE was published by Rhazes, R-H-A-Z-E-S. Not in 1900, not in 1800. It was republished in 1500. It was originally published in the year 1000, in the century 1000. So this disease that's over 1,000 years old in the medical literature, the NCAA questions in 2014. Though there's little known about what causes CTE. Why? That's what they say. Nothing's known. Or what the true incidence of CTE, in other words, how many cases there are, how many people are getting chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The concern for developing CTE. Some players are worried about getting CTE. And they worry and they say, it's not the CTE, it's not the concussions, it's not the trauma of getting hit in football that's the problem. It's that players are worried about it. They're overly concerned. They need counseling so that they can be reassured that this CTE business, which is not known much about, of course, the NCAA says in 2014. This thing we haven't really looked at, and no one knows much about, they claim. That's not the problem. The problem is you're worried about it. And they implement a program suggesting mental health counseling for people who are worried about it. Well, this is an example of where worry would permit players to learn about it so they could make an informed choice about whether they wanted to play and what the risks were. And telling them they don't need to worry about it is the worst public health measure you could ever take. The essence of public health, the core of public health, is to provide people information in the form of a warning so they can make an informed choice about whether they want to take the risks associated with an activity. And in this case, the risks are death right away, or as in Mr. Plett's cases, death later on. Okay. And of course, up till today, as we sit here, in this deposition, the NCAA has still failed to provide an adequate warning on CTE to college football players. And another thing that I discussed with Mr. Egdorf is, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why? Because if you look at what made the NCAA do things, anything, put in sickle cell testing, anything, to reduce injuries and deaths to athletes, it's lawsuits like this that caused them to do it, that motivated them to do the right thing. Because there's no government regulation. And there's no hope for government regulation. So in public health, this system, this lawsuit system, is the only recourse to get someone to change their repeated bad behavior that causes people to die and get injured seriously. Particularly when the NCAA, instead of doing what it should do, is falsely reassuring people, encouraging them basically to go out and take risks that they don't understand the consequences of.
I'm going to go ahead and object to the non-responsive portion of this
You
answer.
get to do that when he's finished.
I understand.
Well, then don't interrupt him. If you understand and know what the rule is, why'd you do it?
Because he's been non-responsive for a while
Well, he's
now,
been
so.
completely responsive, and he's told you repeatedly these are things we talked about. And I can represent as an officer of the court. He's talked to me about every single thing he said to you so far, which is what you asked him. He taught me several of the things. I didn't know some of these things. He scolded me for not asking some of these things in my deposition. So I assure you, I've heard all about it from him.
I was nice when I scolded you.
Well, sometimes you scolded nicely and sometimes less nicely, but I'll generally agree there were times you were nice. You can go ahead.
If this is I've drank a cup of coffee and some water, so if at some point it appears you're going to be going on for a while, you can continue afterwards. At some point, if we could take a break and I can use the restroom.
You feel free to take a break anytime you want. You just let me know.
Is this a good stopping point for you right now?
It's not, there's no good stopping point, but you want to take a break, we could take a break. No problem.
Let's take a break.
Going off the record, the time is 10:41.